Have you ever heard someone say something and it just makes you stop and think? Like you just have to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, of course. Happens all the time, right? What have you got?
Well, this quote from the Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh, Yogi Adityanath, really got my attention.
Okay.
He was talking about how safe Uttar Pradesh has become since he took office back in 2017.
Right.
But, and here's the thing that really stuck with me. He said, if Hindus are safe, then Muslims are also safe.
I see why that would make you stop and think.
I mean, it's such a bold statement. It sounds almost like a mathematical formula for social harmony.
Yeah.
And you know our listeners. They're smart. They're engaged.
Always want to cut to the chase.
Exactly. They want to understand the nuances of these complex issues. And I think this statement from CM Yogi, it just begs for a deep dive.
Absolutely. I mean, on the surface, it seems straightforward. But when you start to peel back the layers, there's a lot to unpack there.
So that's exactly what we are going to do today. We're going to take this statement, if Hindus are safe, then Muslims are also safe, and really try to figure out what it means. What's the context, what are the implications, and what's the reality on the ground in Uttar Pradesh?
It's a big task.
It is, but I think it's an important one, especially for anyone trying to make sense of the complexities of India today.
Right.
So to start us off, let's look at one of the main points CM Yogi keeps hammering home, and that is that there haven't been any major riots in Uttar Pradesh since 2017. And he contrasts this very explicitly with the period before he came to power, when he says both Hindu and Muslim communities were caught in these cycles of violence, where there was property damage, fear, just an overall sense of instability. Now he's claiming that under his leadership, those kinds of large-scale communal clashes, they're a thing of the past.
Well, if that's true, it would definitely be a significant change. But I think it's important to remember that safety, especially when we're talking about communal harmony, it's not just about the absence of outright violence.
Right. You can't just say, oh, well, there haven't been any riots, so everything's great.
Exactly. It's much more nuanced than that. There are so many other factors that contribute to a sense of safety and well-being within a community.
Absolutely. And that kind of leads us to the heart of this statement, right? This idea that if Hindus are safe, then Muslims are also safe.
Right.
On a surface, it seems almost too simplistic, like some kind of equation, like if A, then B.
It does, doesn't it?
But can you really reduce something as complex as social harmony to a formula like that? I mean, what are we assuming when we make that kind of connection?
It's a good question. I mean, on one hand, you could argue that there are certain basic things that contribute to a sense of security for everyone in society, regardless of their religion.
Like what? Give me an example.
Well, effective law enforcement would be one. If the police are doing their job and preventing crime, that benefits everyone. But on the other hand, you also have to acknowledge that different communities might experience different types of vulnerabilities.
Okay.
Or have different concerns that aren't necessarily addressed by just focusing on the safety of one group. It's like, are we assuming that the things that make Hindus feel safe are automatically going to make Muslims feel safe as well?
And that takes us to another part of this that's really gotten people talking, and that is the comparison that CM Yogi draws.
Okay.
He seems to be contrasting what he calls, Hindu tolerance with the situation of minorities in some Muslim-majority countries.
I see.
And to really illustrate his point, he has this very pointed question, he says. A Muslim family is the safest among 100 Hindu families. But can 50 Hindus be safe among 100 Muslim families? No. And then to back up this point, he points to what's happened to Hindu minorities in places like Bangladesh and Pakistan and Afghanistan.
That's a pretty loaded comparison, isn't it?
It is.
He's essentially saying that there's this inherent tolerance built into Hindu society, especially when you compare it to what's happened in these other countries.
Right.
But the thing is, when you start making these kinds of broad generalizations about entire religious groups, you're kind of missing the nuances of the situation. Because within any society, within any religious group, you're going to have a wide spectrum of views and behaviors and experiences.
Sure.
And it makes you wonder, if you're a leader who's responsible for the well-being of all your citizens, should you really be focusing on these kinds of comparisons? Comparisons that could potentially create divisions or dredge up old grievances? Or should you be working to build a sense of shared security and belonging for everyone within your own state?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? But leaving that aside for a moment, CM Yogi also brings in this idea of Sanatan Dharma.
Okay.
He argues that historically it's not a religion that's been about forced conversions or trying to dominate others politically.
Right.
And he talks about this principle of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which basically means the whole world is one family. He's saying that this is at the very core of Sanatan Dharma and that it really emphasizes inclusivity.
It's a powerful concept. The whole world is one family.
It is. And it kind of connects back to this idea of safety, right?
I see that.
Because if you truly believe that everyone is part of one big family, then you have a responsibility to make sure everyone feels safe and protected.
Okay, so how does this principle translate into action? How do we see this philosophy reflected in what's actually happening in Uttar Pradesh?
Well, that's a good question. And one way the Yogi government tries to answer that is by pointing to how they handle law and order during religious festivals.
Okay.
Like they talk about the measures they've taken during events like Ram Navami and Eid.
Oh, right. Big processions, right?
Yeah, exactly. They've also emphasized how strictly they enforce the Supreme Court guidelines on noise pollution. And I don't know if you remember this, but CM Yogi actually called out the state of West Bengal over violence that happened during Ram Navami celebrations there. It was almost like he was saying, look, we can do it right here in Uttar Pradesh. Why can't they get it together over there?
So they're really highlighting their approach to law enforcement during these potentially sensitive religious events.
Right. They're saying, look, we make sure things stay under control. We enforce the rules, and that helps keep everyone safe.
Right.
But the question is, and this is something for you listening to think about, is it really just about control?
Right.
Or does it actually go deeper than that? Does it create a genuine atmosphere of respect and understanding between different communities?
It's a good question, and a tough one to answer definitively, because maintaining order and preventing violence is definitely important.
Of course.
But it's not the same as creating true harmony, is it?
No, it's not. And this kind of brings us to another incident that I think highlights just how sensitive these issues are.
What happened?
Well, you might remember that there was this controversy a while back where a tarpaulin was used to cover a mosque during Holi celebrations.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. That caused quite a stir.
It did. And CM Yogi addressed it by saying that they had given very clear instructions that nobody should be throwing colors on religious sites.
Which makes sense.
It does. But then he also kind of downplayed the whole thing. He asked, would it be considered impure if the shadow of a Muharram flag fell on a Hindu house?
I see. So he was trying to frame it as an overreaction.
Exactly. But what's interesting is how differently people viewed that whole incident. Because for some people, it was like, oh, big deal. They were just trying to protect the mosque from getting messy.
Right.
But for others, it was a much bigger issue. It was about respect. It was about the sanctity of religious spaces. And it really highlighted how even something that might seem minor to some people can carry a huge amount of symbolic weight for others.
And as a leader, you have to be sensitive to those different perspectives.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the key takeaways from this whole deep dive. Because when you step back and look at everything that CM Yogi is saying, the main argument is that Uttar Pradesh is safer now because riots have stopped and the rule of law is being enforced more strictly.
Right.
But as we've been discussing, safety, true safety, it's not just about the absence of bad things happening.
Exactly. It's multi-layered.
It's about creating an environment where everyone feels protected and valued, no matter who they are, what they believe, or what community they belong to.
And that's where that idea of trust comes in, right?
Yeah.
Because you can't just force people to trust each other or to trust the government.
Yeah.
That trust has to be earned. It has to be built through consistent actions, through policies that are inclusive and that take into account the needs of everyone.
And ultimately, it's about creating a society where every single person in Uttar Pradesh feels like they truly belong, that their rights are respected, their voices are heard, and their future is secure.
That's a big goal.
It is. But I think it's a goal worth striving for. And for our listeners out there, the next time you hear somebody make a big sweeping statement about safety, especially when it comes to communal harmony, I hope you'll remember everything we've talked about today. Because the reality is always going to be much more complex than a simple soundbite.
Much more complex.
And understanding those complexities, being willing to really dig deep and ask those tough questions, that's the first step towards creating a society that's truly safe and inclusive for everyone.
Absolutely. And it's an ongoing process.
It is. It's something we all have to keep working towards day after day, year after year.
A journey, not a destination.
Well said. And on that note, we're going to wrap things up for today. But as always, the conversation continues. We encourage you to keep thinking about these issues, to keep asking those tough questions, and to keep working towards a better future for everyone.
Thanks for listening.
And thanks for joining us on this deep dive.